you can start.
Okay, Umat, ויש להבין בעניין ייחוד ישרול ויעקב ולאה ורחל. וביר עניין לאה ורחל ידוע שזהו עניין מחשב ודיבור. והיינו ברס היין לשם הוויה, כמו שמבוא בזוהר תרי נוקבי ופרי שלוימי, חולו עדי מלבנון קלה חולו. ראשונה השם הגדול עליה, והאחרונה השם הקטן רחל, חולו. ותחילה יש להקדם בעניין הכל כל יעקב. So by the way, you notice over here one thing that you'll notice in many places, that Leah is machshava, and machshava seems to be interchangeable, different levels of machshava. Like over here, he calls it the hay, the upper hay. The upper hay is actually bina.
Right.
Leah really should be part of the lower hay, because the chitzonius machshava is called malchus also. It's not the upper hay; it's really the lower hay. As a matter of fact, the whole thing that he's saying here is Yisrael B'Leah means Zer v'Nukve. Nukve is Malchus, not Bina.
Right.
But the thing of Machshava, like we were discussing before, and like that thing that Shimon wrote up on what was the thing in Perek Beis, that Machshava has different levels. And they work together. The Chitzonius is the letters themselves, and the Pnimius is the actual intellect of the Machshava.
Right.
So Tchila Yesh Lahaktim. So that's what we're going to talk about is Yichud Zun. But before we get to Yichud Zun, we're going to be marking something in terms of Zerantin. In Akril Kol Yaakov, that the voice is the voice of Yaakov, that the voice comes from Zerantin. Sheyesh Kol Apnima the Lo Mishtama Hulu. So there's now he's going to explain the voice that's heard and the voice that's not heard. So the basic thing, the general thing of Yichud Zun is that in speech, the voice itself comes from the lungs and the heart. Kol Yaakov. And the chituch into letters comes from Bina, actually.
Right.
And it comes from Bina to Leah to Rachel. In other words, the letters are split up in Machshava, and when they split up in Machshava, they go into Dibur. That's the whole thing that the next few chapters are going to be about. But first of all, we're discussing the inyan of the voice. And there's two voices. There's the voice that's heard and the voice that's not heard. That from one day to another day he'll give Aimer, they'll like say, they'll say to each other, but Aimer is Shazel Esh Maim Ruach. First it says Esh Maim Ruach. Hagas. Moyakol Shumurka Me'amar Agashmian. Ka Hevel Alev Atzmo Kalu Ma'amar Ruchnian. Subhinat Chesed Gvura, the Mutza means Tiferet, Shua Ruach. Eshamayim, and Tiferet is Ruach. Tahainu, Pchinas, Kibus, Vitpastu, Shebehevel Aruchni Dulev. Mo, Kasha Adam Sameach Balibai, Ajes Pchinas Areit Pashtus Balev. Then his heart like opens up big. Who Hevel the Chassadim. And that's called the Hevel of Chassadim. The Phuba Oitel Pchinas Akivut the Timtum. He feels like his heart is like vetch. Who Pchinas Hevel the Gvura. So Mutza and Chesed Gvura who Hevel Ruchni and Mutza and Mutza and Memtoz Chesed Gvura together. The Ruach of Mutza and Eshumayim Begeshem HaHevel. Like the Ruach, which is a Mutza from fire and water. Yadua Shatimain Misaida Esh, the thirst comes from fire. It can't nichar braini, my throat is like scratchy.
Hoarse.
Yeah, well, hoarse, right. The kol agashmi, ba mitikbori Tisaid Esh, the Hevel Alev, like Louis Armstrong.
Right.
Like that kind of voice.
Right.
So a voice that comes from fire. That's like a hoarse voice. That's from Tikvaris who says Esha Behevel Alev. Well, the Hefech Tfilas called Hevel Alev Misei Damayim, like a voice that's like a bell. Very clear voice from Yisei Damayim. V'amamutza Shehurach Mamuzak. And the middle, which is like a more spiritual voice, so means a real good voice, is when it has both of those things together. Not totally hoarse and not totally, like if a voice is like totally like a bell, in a way it's beautiful, but it's only good for certain things. It's not the real good singers have to have a little bit mixture from both of them. The kachu, and also besides the fact of the actual externality of voice, is also the thing of the emotion of the voice. The mikra kol arav l'nefesh, the real most beautiful voices of the greatest singers, have like a mixture of happiness and sadness in them. You know, like the big chazanim and stuff.
Right.
It's not like totally crying. A totally crying voice is not beautiful because it's missing the tzlilut. Like that, you know, that's not beautiful. On the other hand, just a happy voice, just like happy like kids are playing and shouting, that's also not a beautiful voice. And by a chazan, you know, there's like this, it's got the clarity of the voice like a happy voice, but it's also got that crying quality, you know.
Right.
And that, same thing in opera. That's what is like a beautiful emotional voice, where the emotion, it's a mamutza from the two of them together.
Right.
So nikra kol arev l'nefesh. That's what's called a beautiful voice that is beautiful to listen to. That the beautiful voice depends on the miziga and the heart. In other words, the real great singers, it's not enough that they should have voice training. Voice training and not, alone, even though you might have a good voice to start off with, and you can go and have the voice training, but that won't make you enough to be a great singer. The real thing about a great singer is that he can put feeling into his voice. And that sometimes you'll see somebody who's a great singer, like some very famous singers that really don't have a good voice and don't really have the training either. Like two examples of this is like Shlomo Carlebach and lahavdil Bob Dylan. Both of them are from the most famous singers. They're superstars. Like, for instance, in the Jewish market, in the Jewish song market, probably your biggest superstar is Shlomo Carlebach. I would say even more so than Mordechai Ben David or anybody like that. Why? Even though some of those guys have a much better voice than him, actually, but he could really put feeling into the song, so that people would love to hear it, even though his voice wasn't all that great, and sometimes he was a little bit off key even. But he could really get that feeling into the song. The same thing with Bob Dylan, that his voice isn't that great, and he doesn't really have very good voice training, but he can somehow he conveys a real feeling in the song.
Right.
You know. So, and not only that, even in terms of the actual beautiful voice, like operatic voices, The difference between like somebody who's got a good voice and a real superstar like Pavarotti or something like that, you know, is that they can get an emotion. It's hard to get. That's not just the lungs and larynx. That's why you notice the real great singers, the ones who really make it big, you notice that when they sing, they close their eyes and they concentrate and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they like have to sort of go in a little bit. It's not just a, what do you call it? It's not just technique.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, once in a while, I don't know if you ever heard somebody who was pure technique and no feeling, and could be somebody with a fantastic voice and fantastic technique, but it's boring.
Right.
You know, it's like, you know, even though they sing it perfectly, but it's because there's no feeling in it.
Right.
So the feeling, you can hear the feeling in the voice, is what he's saying here. And this, Kol Arev Nefesh, the real Arivus of the coil, is Toloi Davka in the Hevel Halev, which the Hevel Halev over here he's talking about, the Hevel Halev Davka, the Hevel Halev he's talking about here, the Hevel Halev is the lungs, by the way. But there's also the Pnimius Hevel Halev, also is the Hevel Aruchni in the heart itself, meaning the emotion. וגם ברוח החיים שבכל הלב הימוני וכל הלב השמאלי הרי הוא בבחינת דוסה ושואב וציקו דליבה. The whole life force in the heart is in a way of ratza v'shoiv, in the beating of the heart, sayadua. שזהו גם כבבחינת קיבוס התפשטות. It's the whole thing of the beating of the heart that keeps you alive. Is it kvetches and opens, it kvetches and opens. אלא שהוא בהפך, except it's opposite. כאשר רוח החיים נכנס מן המוח בלב, מתכבד לכבל. וכשיוצא מתפשט. In other words, when it's mitkaved, it pushes the blood out and receives the life force from the brain. Which you say, what's he talking about? If you think about it, even in terms of the plain mechanics of it, like if you'll ask the physicians, why does the heart kvetch? They say because it receives a message from the brain through the nerves.
Right.
And when it receives a message, like any muscle, that's when it kvetches.
Right.
So when it kvetches, it's receiving from the brain.
Right.
And when it opens up, that means, in other words, the electricity from the brain kvetches a muscle.
Right.
So it receives the nervous message from the brain when it's kvetching.
Right.
Not when it's expanding. And when it's expanding and taking blood in, it's the opposite way with the brain.
Right.
So when the Ruach Hayim comes to the Moyach into the heart, meaning the message, the Ruach Hayim is that the brain sends into the heart, then it goes, then it's mitkabed. And when it goes away, then it's mitpashet.
Right.
The opposite of the blood. And the blood, after the opposite. When it kvetches, the blood gets sent out. And when it's mitpashet, the blood gets taken in.
Right.
Lafisha chayas davka ratzav hashayiv. The chayas is a pun, actually. The chayus. It says that the chayos upstairs are ratzav hashayiv. They run back and forth, and this is like a play on words that the chayus of a person is in a way of ratzav hashayiv. The whole thing of chayus is all ratzav hashayiv. The breathing is ratzav hashayiv. The heart is ratzav hashayiv, means the whole way that the blood system works is ratzav hashayiv. and the life force coming out of the brains, meaning the stuff that goes into the nerves, also goes in beats. To the point that they now have this biofeedback and stuff like that, and they know they have different beats, like the delta beat and the theta beat.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
Like when we sleep, like light sleep is called theta and deep sleep is called delta. It's a certain amount of beats per second.
Right.
And the thing is that in your brain literally has beats, same like your heart does. And the same like with the heart, that when we're very active, the heart is faster. And when we sleep, the heart slows down. Apparently the beats of the brain also slow down. When you're awake, they go up to a certain level. I can't remember, it's like 10 something megahertz or hertzes or whatever it is, or 10 beats per second or whatever. Then it goes down. When it goes down to 4 beats or lower per second, it's deep sleep. But the basic thing is the whole chayus is in a way of ratzav hashay, in and out. It's beats.
Right.
And that's why also in music, rhythm, like this whole thing is all tied together, singing and music and chayus and stuff like that. That's why people like, the rhythm will get them going, so that if you hear a slow, sad song with slow rhythm and, you get sad and people start crying,
Right.
And a fast song like a polka or rock and roll will get you all going, or songs can even get you mad and stuff, And it's because the chayus ratzav hashay u'kamavur b'sifrei refuah, and this is explained in medical books, that everything goes with beats. The kol ze nikra kol the mishtama b'dibur. And this part here is called the voice that is heard. What does it mean? That this voice you do hear in the speech, the emotion, you can hear in the speech. Shezeo p'chinas ruach hevel hadibur, and animals also have this. Like in a dog, you can hear in his voice if he's happy or sad. Ruach hevel hadibur, v'hainu p'chinat kol v'dibur hanizkar b'zohar v'kama duchtei, v'hu p'chinat yichud Yaakov v'Rachel. דהיינו בחינת המשוכר של המידות שבלב, הבא בבחינת רוח הבל הלב, מורכב מאמר רוחניים, עד בחינת כל הדיבור. So, and this is something what they say, to listen to when you listen to somebody talking, you're listening not only to the words, but to the emotions. Like a guy comes home and he says to his wife, "What's the matter?" He says, "Oh, nothing." He says, "What do you mean, nothing?" "I told you nothing is the matter." So from the emotion in the voice, you can see that it's not nothing is the matter. It's a crying voice. That means the emotion can be heard in the voice. Even though if you would just listen to the words, "Oh, okay, nothing, that's nice. I'm glad you're happy." So that's the clock. Kol Kol Yaakov means that the emotion goes into the voice to connect with the actual dibur. This is called Kol HaMishtama, the voice that is heard. And that's the amshoch of the midos into the voice. And it's murkav me'amar ruchniim ad chinas kol hadibur, which there becomes murkav from amar Gashmiyam. In other words, it's a physical voice. But in the physical voice, you can hear the chesed gvura teteres. Ubechinas koyach hadibur nimshach mnekav achazed lev chulu, and the power of speaking comes from the what do you call it? The veshet, or whatever you call it. How do you spell that in English?
What?
The tube, you know, the neck of Hakaz Halef, the hole, there's a hole at the end of the lungs. Huh?
The windpipe.
The windpipe. There's a hole at the end of there's a hole at the end of the lungs. Neck, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the lungs is a hole, and then it goes into a tube, and that's how you can talk.
Right.
Your lungs have to push the air out in order to make a voice. And the Nikra Ruach Mamalala is called a talking wind, and it's literally a wind. Literally. We don't mean spirit, it's literally a wind, that's what it is. And downstairs here, what it is there's a wind goes through the lungs is like a bellows, and it pushes a wind through the throat, the windpipe, and there's a larynx, which is sort of like an oboe thing or something like that, you know.
Right.
And it's basically like a wind instrument almost.
That's exactly what it is.
You know, like an oboe or something.
Right.
It's not exactly a reed, but whatever you want to say, there's the larynx.
It causes the larynx to vibrate.
Yeah, it causes the larynx to vibrate, and it's basically like a wind instrument. Like an oboe or something like that. If you don't blow into it, it won't make a noise.
Right.
You have to blow, and then it'll make the noise. Like those, basically what it is like, you know, those noisemakers.
Right.
If you have at parties, you blow into it and it goes toot, and the thing goes out like a frog tongue.
Right.
You know, but that little plastic thing with a harmonica reed in it.
Right.
You blow into it and it goes toot. And that's basically the way that the voice works, except that it's slightly more sophisticated than that reed, whereas like in a harmonica, each reed only has one thing. Over here it's a reed that can reshape itself, like.
It stretches.
It stretches, right. So you can sing and stuff all in one reed, and it works like, you know, with a balloon. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You know, you take a balloon and you blow it up and you stretch the end and you can make different noises out of it.
Right.
So what you have is you have a flexible reed that you can stretch, and also according to the emotions that affect the bellows. So it's not just the bellows also changes. It's not just a fixed bellows, like, you know, a fixed bellows can only do one thing. But the bellows, first of all, it can push out more and less air, and also the way it pushes it out is affected by the emotions in the heart.
Right.
So that the final voice that will be heard when it goes through the wind, goes through the reed, will be in such a way that you can actually hear the emotion in the voice. And this is even in speaking, like you can hear, like when somebody's talking, you can hear if he really, like for instance, if he really means it.
Right.
Or if he's really interested in what he's saying. Like right now, if you listen to my voice, you'll notice that it sounds like I'm actually interested in this lesson. I'm not just bored. And like sometimes somebody's talking like that.
Right.
And he's saying the same words, but it doesn't sound like he's interested in what he's saying.
He's not into it.
He's not into it. And also you can hear in the voice if he really like means it and stuff like that.
Right.
So you can hear, besides just Chesed and Gvura, you can also hear Netzach and stuff like that.
Right.
Also Hoyt.
Right.
You know, like when you tell a guy to say uncle.
Right.
Or like a little kid, that you tell him say sorry, and he says sorry, and you say you don't sound sorry.
Right.
So what do you mean? I just said sorry. He says, yeah, but you don't sound sorry. What does it mean you don't sound sorry? That you didn't hear the hoid in his voice. He's not really moided that you're right and he's wrong. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you can hear all of these things in the voice.
Right.
So that's called Ruach Ma'ala. So the Koyach HaDibur comes from the power to talk, comes from the lungs. If you don't have the bellows pushing it, you wouldn't be able to talk. The that the beginning of the speech is connected to the lungs. The Malchus is nitzav in the Eshen Mayim of the heart. On Shabbos, you're supposed to stop in to talk those kind of things. But it's talking about really not just to not say them, but it should, even from the heart, it should stop. וכנראה בחוש, שאם הלב עוצב בקיבוץ יעמד בדיבור, and you see that if a person is real sad, then he doesn't want to talk. He just wants to sit there and mope. And he doesn't want to talk. He said, come on, talk to me. No, I don't want to talk. So when a person is real happy, then he wants to talk. He wants to talk about it. He wants to tell everybody about it. Because the power of speech really comes from the heart. In other words, the kesser of Malchus comes from Zoh, means from the heart. In other words, from the emotions. If he has a pashtus of the emotions, this causes a rutzen to talk or a rutzen not to talk. וכאשר לא נמשך מהבל הלב בדיבור על דרך שאמר ליבה לפומה לא גליה, and if he doesn't say what he has in his heart into his mouth, means he just keeps it in his heart. In other words, the heart does not reveal it to the mouth. Lo nasid var melech hadayin. Then you cannot have a command of the king. In other words, the king cannot complain to anybody that he wanted something in his heart and they didn't do it. Just because the king wanted in his heart, you can do totally opposite from it, and the king can't complain. He can't say that you are moired malchus. He can't say, well, I wanted the opposite, and you did the opposite of what I wanted. He said, when did you say it, king? He said, well, I didn't say it, but I felt it. So that he can't do. It doesn't become a something, and therefore it doesn't have to be done. He says 40 days before the guy is created, born, it says who his wife is going to be and where he's going to live and all kinds of just about everything about him. But Tzaddik V'Rasha, it doesn't say. But he thinks it. If he would have said Tzaddik V'Rasha, then a person wouldn't be able to do tshuva. It wouldn't be in his hand anymore. But he does think it. That's why some people, you think, so wait a minute, if it's totally free So how come some people, you see, like Yaakov and Esav, the classic examples, they were already like that before they were born?
Hold on, let me turn the tape over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so like Yaakov and Esav, I mean, from one side, you see that a person is born a certain way. Some people are born with what do you call it? A predisposition to be a tzaddik, and some people are born a predisposition to be a rasha, like you see by Yaakov and Esav. So why? Because he did think it. So if you say if it's like that, so why are you blaming Esav for? If Abraham would have thought that he would be a tzaddik, so he'd also be a tzaddik. And what are you praising Yaakov for? He thought, Abraham thought he'll be a tzaddik. He was a tzaddik. He says that, yeah, he thought it, but he didn't say it. That means really Yaakov could have been affected by the world and become, Shalom, hello?
Yeah.
Of Russia. And Esav could have done tshuva. As a matter of fact, if Esav would have done tshuva, he could have been even bigger than Yaakov. And that's why Yitzchak loved him better, because he knew that really, in other words, the thing is not that he loved him just totally because he was fooled. That's the external meaning of it. But the more internal meaning is because he loved him because he was a rasha.
And he saw his potential. He saw his potential.
Yeah, but the potential was because in thought, in machshava, he was a rasha.
Right.
And the thing that he fooled him into thinking that he was a tzaddik. You know, like he used to say, Rashi says, he used to ask, how do you make meiser on salt?
Salt and straw.
Right. So then he thought he's a tzaddik. So still, why should he love him more than Yaakov? Because Yaakov was also a tzaddik. And by the avos, it's not that they love somebody just for a whim. Why? Because he fooled him to think he's a tzaddik, so therefore he thought that since he's in machshava, he was a rasha, and he became a tzaddik, so it means he's even bigger than Yaakov, who was not such a big deal that he was a tzaddik, because machshava he was already a tzaddik. So tzaddik v'rasha lo ka'amar. If he would have said it, then there's no free choice anymore. Once he says it has to be like this. Once I say something, it has to happen. The Eibishter changed his mind. He said to his heart, זהו בחינת חגת דהבו הלב דזו, שבא מתחת בדיבור עלמא דהתגליה, כידוע ודאי למאבן. And we're going to stop here, and that's called the Mishtama. And now the next thing is going to be called the Lo Mishtama. So we'll stop over here.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so that's the Kol of the Mishtama, is the actual voice, and in the voice you can hear the emotions. V'yesh Pinas Kol of the Pnima, the Lo Mishtama b'dibur klal, v'hu Pinas HaMoichin sheb'midas chesed gvura, kmo av v'yir sh'lamayla and Pinas Ruach HaChaim sheb'alev, kmo etzem chedva sh'l'ava v'chesed, or etzem reges v'din sh'lira v'pachad, שהם הרוחנים הרבה גם מהקובץ הרוחני דאש מים רוח הנ"ל, הבא במורכב בלא הגשמי. וגם שיש בזה הקובץ מאש מים רוח, שהוא בחינת חגת, אבל הוא בבחינת הפנימיס שבלב, שהוא במידוס חגת, In other words, the actual reason.
Right.
That, in other words, you can, in the voice, you can tell somebody's sad.
Right.
But you can't from the voice tell why he's sad.
Right.
The reason behind it. The inner, the voice of Bina, which is in Zoh. In other words, even the bechain of why is it that you're mad? I mean, you can see the guy is mad, but you don't know why he's mad, and you also can't tell just by the voice who he's mad at.
Right.
Or why exactly he's happy, and who he's happy with, or what he's happy with. Did he make some money? Did he win the lottery? Did he meet a good friend? That you can't. The kolop lima de bina you can't hear.
Right.
That's habar v'nimshach min hamoach halev. V'kasher hu ba b'itpalus ruchnish l'yedei hadas pinat Yisrael now v'nimshach miyad ba'isas halachshova shenikra leah nikra yichud Yisrael v'leah pnimis hamidu shebalev. And this inner voice, inner reasoning comes from the inner part of the emotion, which is called the das. Means that the actual das is also emotions, but it's the seichel of the emotions.
Right.
Which is called Yisrael. And right away, it becomes oisis hamachshava, that he thinks why he's mad.
Right.
Like he hit me.
Yeah.
So nikra leah, and that's called leah. And that's nikra yichud Yisrael v'leah. Pnimi is hamidah shebalev, miyad meharher b'machshava. Right away, it's meharher in machshava. And that you can't hear, that machshava, you can't hear in the voice. Im itpal b'sechel v'tam lahava v'chesed, hare miyad yova midah zu im hamoichin sheba b'machshava. This midah, and it'll be like a thought, in other words, even though it's just letters, but there's different kinds of letters. There's happy letters, and there's angry letters, and there's sad letters. In machshava.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the machshava itself can be happy.
Right.
So the machshava that is the machshava that holds the seichel of the midah is not just like totally dead letters. Letters of machshava actually have a quality to them.
Right.
In other words, it's not just the letters come, it's this midah with the moichin comes into the machshava. Kiyadua. Shamachshava malbeshes hamidas to Yisrael b'parteihem v'nikol leah. Why she's called leah? K'monilla lahachel, it's too much for her to contain hamidas, hulu. She's always overfilled. The machshava is always overfilled. That's why a person can't really never stop thinking. And the more midos, if a person is real happy or real sad or real angry, it's like almost he can't think at all. It's like, you know what I'm talking about?
Right.
It's nilla. It's like his machshava is plutzing. Like he says, I feel like my brain is blowing up. I'm so angry at the guy.
Right.
Because he can't even think all that he wants to think at one shot, you know.
Right.
So the machshava is nila mehafel. It's too much for it to contain. The midos, hulu. The sheirish leah lemayla bebina. And the sheirish of leah is upstairs in bina. So sometimes they're called almost interchangeably. Hainu leah yolda shisha bonim. Leah gave birth to 6 children. China dvav kitzvid the midas dezah. That is the midos from Chassidus till Yisai. Ach yichud Yisrael v'leah hainu moichin da'ava shebezah. So the yichud Yisrael of Leah That is the moichin of Ava, means of the seichel, which is in Zah, the actual reason for the emotion. Hu mityached the leah tachtoina, not in actual the up. There's like an upper leah which is bina, the shoyrish of leah. But it's mityached in the actual machshava, means in the oisius of the machshava. The machshava mekabelas min tchilat malchus etvuna, shoyrish machshava. The machshava, however, receives, even though it becomes a lavush for Zah, but it really receives from malchus of tvuna. The letters have to come from malchus of tvuna, and that's the kol apnimah, the lo mishtama. It's the voice of the seichel, full of adala maven. And the malchus of tvuna is what really gives the actual letter to the machshava. Not the midah. The midah does really, the midah really receives from the same place as the machshava receives. The midah also receives really from malchus of tvuna through that.
Right.
And the way it receives it is you have to have the machshava. The machshava actually gives the life force to the midah. So that without the machshava, the midah can die.
Right.
And that's the reason for counting to 10. The reason you count to 10 is to break the machshava, and therefore, if you break the machshava that's enclosing and holding the anger, you break the anger because you break the inner voice of the anger, so you can actually break the whole anger.
Right.
And that's the reason for counting to 10. Like, when somebody's real mad, they tell them count to 10. Or if somebody's scared, there's a song, whistle a happy tune.
Right.
So if you can force a different machshava, which that's to whistle a happy tune means, or counting to 10 means you're forcing a different machshava. You're forcing different letters in your head.
Right.
If you can force a different machshava, it can actually, there's no keli for the midah, so the midah sort of disappears. Now, of course, if the lion is standing in the room with you, it's gonna be very hard to whistle a happy tune.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why? Because the midah is getting directly from the brain. That, in other words, the bina keeps saying, "Hey, but the lion is still here. This whistle a happy tune. You know what I'm saying?" So,
right.
So it doesn't necessarily work because there's higher things that can make the machshava that can keep putting into the machshava. Hey, there's a lion here.
Right.
And that's the machshava.
That's the what?
That's the machshava that's keeping the midah.
Right.
But if he can really whistle a happy tune even with the lion there, that he can literally stop thinking that there's a lion there, he'll stop being scared. Although it's very hard to do. Not only that, the lion might kill him.
Right.
Scared or not.
I mean, the thing is that sometimes it's good to whistle a happy tune, and that's where it's like, it's not a real lion, like if somebody's walking in the dark or something like that, or...
Yeah, the phobia.
It's a phobia, right. But where there's a real lion, even with like walking in the dark in a dangerous part of town,
right,
it's a good idea to, instead of trying to whistle a happy tune, to listen to your phobia and do something about it.
Right.
So that's also a thing of tikkun, that you have to. This thing you have to know when to whistle a happy tune and when to listen to the phobia.
Right.
And most of the time, it's a good idea to try to listen to the phobia first of all and see if if there's a real thing behind it, that something should be done about it.
Right.
And a lot of these things that people are into, like going to movies,
mm-hmm.
is all because of this thing here. like during the depressions and wars and stuff like that, movies become very, very popular.
Right.
And people didn't have had very bad matzav. So escapist type movies, what they do is they get their head off their problem. So since they don't think of their problem, so, like people would go to a comedy and laugh.
Right.
And since they were laughing, they were actually happy.
Right.
And I mean, the midah, when they were laughing, they were laughing.
Right.
And since the machshava was about the movie rather than about what the matzav is, and that's why people drink and take drugs, or they go to a bar and talk with other people, or go to the football game. And that's also why the people are so interested. Who cares who won the football game?
Right.
Or who this guy is and who they're going to hire for the next season. But you notice that a lot of times the people who are talking about all these things are these people that if they would think about their own problems, they'd get depressed.
Right.
So instead, they think about the football game. There's also why women, they like to watch all these soap operas.
Right.
Because it gets them off of their own problems. And that's because the machshava contains the midah, and that's Yichud Yisrael and Leah. And the machshava really receives the malchus of tvuna, is the real shreish of machshava. Even though it encloses the midah, it's really receiving its letters from malchus of tvuna. V'day l'mevin. V'yesh Yichud Yisrael v'rochel, kasher bo ha'eres pinat nimis ha'moichin shebemidas bedibur. When the moichin come directly into dibur. In other words, where he talks straight out of his brain. And that's a very uncommon thing. I don't even know how to give an example of it. It could be like, when somebody's, I could only think of it when somebody's saying over Chassidus so that he's totally into it, that he's mamish saying it almost without actually going through a real machshava, although they're really, even in this, in Yichud Yisrael v'rochel, there has to be a leah there.
Right.
You cannot talk without thinking it.
Right.
It's just that the connection is so direct that the leah is sort of negligible. It's almost like it doesn't exist. It's totally transparent.
Right.
V'ken Yichud Yaakov v'leah shenikra hirhure liba. In other words, he thinks about, that car that I like. It's not mamish like a real, the pnimius hamida, like fear of a lion is a pnimius hamida. But like he thinks about something that he likes, for instance, or something that he doesn't like, or something that happened at work, it's hirhurim. I don't know how you say it in English. In Hebrew it's called hirhurim. It's just thinking,
Right.
When it comes in the brain, that's called Yaakov and Leah. Some chitzonius halev, just regular stuff, comes up in Yerhurim that he walks down the street and there's like thoughts in his head.
Right.
Again, yes, Yichud Yaakov and Rachel, shehu amshach chitzonius hamidah shebalev v'dibur kanal. When the chitzonius hamidas in the lev go into dibur canal, but really again, there has to be a machshava in the middle. It's just that it doesn't count. The Seder Hishtalshelut lifamim kachu, and it works in different ways. So it can be in different. Now he's going to tell you the different ways. Shapchinas hamidah shebalev oile mitachet machshava umina machshava ba'al halev bechitzonius hevel halev. So sometimes it's from the midos in the heart. He has a midah in his heart. That goes up and is misyachet in the machshava, and he has to think about it. And from the machshava it comes to the chitzonius of the heart, means into the lungs. And from the hevel halev, nichnas lehevel hadibur, shenikra kol v'dibur. And this is the usual way that it works. ולפעמים מן המחשבה נכנס לדיבור, כמו שמדבר מה שחושב. In other words, he says what he thinks. You know, they say a smart guy thinks what he says, and a meshuggah says what he thinks. In other words, when he just thinks of something and he right away says it. That's called Ikvei Leah Nichnas and Tachresh Rachel. The feet of Leah go inside the head of Rachel, like a kung fu movie. And at this time, when he talks what he thinks, but even then, it has to be what's in his heart that goes up in machshava. You can't have a machshava without midos. Even a machshava of total seichel, you have to have midos shebalev. Like right now, we're basically reading out of a book. There has to be a midah in the lev that you want to learn this. And there have to be various inyanim, like there has to be some netzach and hoid, and there has to be love for this thing and hatred for anything that'll stop us from this. Without no midos at all, you can't have machshava.
Right.
There has to be some kind of midos, otherwise you won't even talk, because there won't be the netzach to come up and talk. Not only that, you see, even when somebody's giving a speech about like something intellectual, it's not just like a robot. There's always some kind of a power or something, and that's an emotion.
Right.
There is an emotion in and you can hear that emotion in the voice. So even when he's just talking what he's thinking, it still has to come from his heart, because without midos there would be no machshava. נמצא בחינת יעקב שהוא רוח הבל כל הלב משמש מחשוב ודיבור שנקראים בייס אחיוס לאה ורachel. So we see that the Yaakov, who is the ruach of the hevel of the coil of the heart, meaning your basic emotions, and it pilots to the emotions in the lungs, is mishamish in both thought and speech, which is two sisters, Leah and Rachel, Almadit Kasim, Almadit Galia, Maimer Sosum, Maimer Pesuach, Machshov and Dibur, Duvedal and Maven. While there in the same way, Yesh Yichud, Yisrael v'Leah v'Yichud, Yisrael v'Rachel, b'Pnimis Hamidos, K'mo Kol Pnima Anal. So in the same way like that, there's also the thing that it goes from Yisrael, from the Pnimis Hamidos, it goes to Machshava. Machshava, it goes back to the Chitzonius HaHevel, and from the Chitzonius HaHevel, it goes to Rachel. Or else it could be that he's talking what he's thinking, but even then there has to be the Yisrael. There has to be the Yisrael there. And that's when you're talking much more on a deeper intellectual thing, like right now, what we're doing is some kind of a yichud from Yisrael, and not from Yaakov. The yichud that we're doing now in the speech, what is going into our speech and thought, is that for Yisrael, not Yaakov. We're not just thinking about some emotional thing.
Right.
We're thinking from Yisrael, and even from that, it's the real inner Yisrael. It's the real pnimius of Yisrael, that is mamish, a thought of thought, a thought of seichel. And that is what's becoming miyuchad in thought and speech.
Right.
And this is pnimius amidus, pinas kol pnima now, that this you can't hear in the actual voice. You can hear it, though, in the letters. It will give out the eshmaim ruach. The Hakach and Aimer. Then it says en Aimer and Dvarim. There is this Aimer and things. you can't hear them in the voice. It says it'll give the Eimer, meaning the midos, over in the voice, and later it says en Eimer.
Right.
There's an inner thing that you can't hear in the voice. En Eimer ve'en dvarim. There's these things you can't hear in the voice, but you can hear them in the letters, which come out of Malchus Atvuna. In other words, like right now, for instance, if somebody would hear my voice, he'd know that I'm talking something that I'm really interested in, and that I'm really connected to. This you can hear from my voice.
Right.
But what I'm talking about, you can't hear from my voice. That is ein Eimer ve'en dvarim. This you can't hear just from the voice.
Right.
So, if somebody doesn't understand English, or let's say even somebody could understand English, but he's not up to where we are, he could even understand the words and still not understand what I'm talking about. Because that you can't hear in the voice. That is Dafka in the letters. And later on he's going to explain how in Malchus, everything can come into Malchus. Even the Seichel and even the Kesser. Like it says, Kesser Malchus. And Shabbos, it's holiness. Like what we're doing right now, it's like Shabbos. It's a yichud of holiness into speech. Good.
To turn off the tape?
Yeah.